Hello everyone and welcome to Maxon's 3D Motion and Design Show. My name is Zach Freeman. I'm an artist here in San Francisco, California. Actually, I am in Oakland, California, but I work out of Territory Studio in San Francisco, California. And we do a lot of visual effects and broadcast design and animation, as well as product, game. But one thing is consistent. We have Cinema 4D, as well as the Maxon suite of plugins and tools in our toolbox, and they are consistently in use. So today, I'd like to show you a little bit of the work we did for FITC Toronto 2022, and break down one of the scenes and show you essentially how we built it. But first, I'm going to go ahead and play our reel, show you a little bit of the work we do at Territory, if you're not already familiar, and we'll jump in when we get back. Okay, that's a quick look at our work here at Territory Studio. We do a lot of stuff. We do a lot of visual effects and animation and all sorts of things. We've got a whole team now in product and game. So we are almost always using Cinema 4D, as well as the other suite of tools and plugins available from Maxon and Red Giant. So now I'm going to go ahead and jump into Cinema 4D. We're going to set the default scene, and I'm going to show you a reason why we want to do that. But first, I'm going to go ahead and show you FITC's Toronto 2022 title sequence to give you an idea of the sort of universe we're going to be playing in. Let's go ahead and open up Cinema 4D, which we've got open here. And as you can see, I have a default scene that is probably a little different from your default scene as you're opening up. And the reason for this is that when I open up Cinema 4D, I like to have a very basic lighting setup. Just a simple object I can throw some materials onto to check them, floor plane just to give give myself a little bit of that and a camera setup. But as well, I like to have my render settings set to Redshift. And that is important when I'm working these days. I don't want to have to kind of switch all these things as I get my file started and have all my settings set up after I've already set up for the day and I'm ready to go creatively. I want to have these things already the default. So I've got my scene set up here. I took all, got just the way I like it with all the settings I like. And I have gone up to the window menu, customization, and I go down to save as default scene. And when I click on this guy, the name will change to new.c4d. It will save in a nice location on your drive in a hidden folder. So now that I have this default scene set up, every time I open a new file, I am presented with my new now default scene. All right, so I've got open here a already prepared file that is baked down so I can scrub through it and show you what we're going to be kind of aiming to create today. So I have recreated a little bit of some of the magic from one of our title sequences in FITC's Toronto 2022 online event. And as you can see, there's just some interesting things, but for the most part, it's a fairly simple action that gave me an opportunity to have a little fun with. So I'm going to take you through this guy right here. But first, I'm just going to kind of reverse through this guy and show you how it was constructed and why it's constructed the way it is. Right now, these guys, all these main objects are baked Alembics. We'll start with that. There's a reason I have chosen to bake these as Alembics. When you have on your autosave as well as backup file, if you go into your preferences and you go to file and you turn on autosave and you bake in, if you're using the cache layer inside your volume builder, if you use a cache layer, if you use one of these guys and you bake this in there, it will save all your data locally to this file, which when you're baking these sorts of high poly mesh objects over a long duration, that file can get very large very quickly. And so when you're doing autosaves, just to make sure that you don't lose your data, you will find that your autosaves are taking excruciatingly long and it can be a total creativity killer. So alternatively, when you think you've got an object that you like, it is preferable to, when you're ready, right click and the animation's ready, right click and bake as Alembic. It will save a Alembic file of the mesh you've created, and then it will automatically drop it into your timeline here or into your object list, and it will allow you to easily kind of scrub through, and it will be saved as a separate file, allowing your progress inside here to not be stunted by too much memory being used. So, and then you can also, it's a nice way to keep and iterate new versions without actually having to delete any of the current versions. So if you like to, mess with the timing a little bit and you want to have an old option without having to rebake it, Alembic allows you to do that. So as you can see in here, we got these limbs, which are color coded for my assistants, so I know which ones they are. These guys kind of operating here. We got another this set over here, and as you can see as I scrub to the end, selects these guys. We got this extension up here, which will just follow along the same path, but it's just a little artistic embellishment. We have the inner core, which, as you can see, I'll just solo each one of these. The inner core is this object here, and as you can see, this is the animation we'll be trying to create. And then for the other side is we have this outer core, which is a little bit of like an outer shell that we just added to the sort of layering effects that we could accomplish with the volume builder. Okay, we are going to start fresh. Let's delete these guys and just work from this guy. I'm going to save a new iteration. And let's go ahead and add a cylinder to the scene. We're going to increase the amount of rotation segments, as this will help our volume builder later on. We'll increase it. And the height segments to somewhere in there. I'm going to go ahead and throw this in. I'm going to hold the Alt key and click on the null, and it will throw it into a new null for me. I'm going to add a shear deformer, and this time I'm going to hold Control, and it will add it to the same hierarchy. And let's go ahead and punch in some numbers here. Let's see. Predetermined numbers I've got written down, thankfully. And let's change this to and you can see we've got a nice little kind of curvy shape going on here. Oh, what do we want to do? We want to throw this guy. Oh, now that I've got this, I'm going to put the deformer inside the cylinder, and now I can throw this guy into a volume builder. So go down here, I'm going to hold the Alt key again, and now this mesh will be inserted into this nice volume builder. And at this point, let's go ahead and add a smooth layer on top, because this will become useful. And our smooth, we probably will be needing to dial it in. I'm going to dial down the pixel distance, or the voxel distance, and I'm going to turn this up, or the voxel density up by kind of decreasing their size. So I have a higher frequency of voxels to measure my mesh with now. And maybe that'll increase this back to 2. See the 2? And I want to create some limbs growing out of this object. So I'm going to add a couple new cylinders. I'm going to go ahead and hold the Control key and click on cylinder. It will add it to the same hierarchy, except now you can see some kind of hard edges. Again, we have to increase the rotation segments so that there's a better origin geometry to read from. And then I don't think I need to add any other really segments, but I'll leave that at default. I'm going to kind of shrink this down, rotate it, kind of put it into position here, and shrink this guy down a little bit more. What are we dealing with here? I got a 38 maybe. Now I'm going to put this, make sure this is dragged under so I can preview the smoothing, how it's going to, see how it's blending these objects together. And I can make sure I have enough length on the object as well, or height. And I kind of push it back in. I'm going to duplicate it. Move this guy down a little bit. Make it a little bit smaller. Push it in a little bit further. There we go. Something like that. As you can see, this guy was created above. I'm going to put it below the smoother again. And now you can see we got something going on here. Just a couple little tree branch stubs. Oops, I'm going to go ahead. I'm going to move these guys up a little bit, maybe. See if I can get some more, a better position. Maybe even rotate them a little bit more. Oop. All right, so we have kind of a nice base form, forming, and it's all just inside the voxel builder. If we turn this off, you can see that we just have our primitives and nothing that fancy going on. So I'm going to continue building this out a little bit. I'm going to go ahead and duplicate these two limbs. I'm going to make them each a little bit smaller. So let's go ahead and kind of lose track of them, but I'm going to use these to kind of eat away at the volume builder. So instead of, I'm going to move them below again. I'm going to now change them to subtract. Now you can see that the cavities are formed kind of from those objects rather than being kind of welded in or, you know, morphed in somehow. So there we go. We have a couple nice little cavities that I can insert some. I can just go ahead and duplicate these two guys and move them outside. And now to start with, I have a couple little branches, you know, you could call them. Make them a little smaller again. Ooh, I forgot when let's go. And same goes over here. Now we have a decent starting point. Nothing's really, it's all just based on the, you know, I know I'm going to use these guys as little, I'm going to animate these in. So it's a nice to, you know, get their positions generally right. And even knowing that I'm not going to put everything in the volume builder, I'm just going to put this kind of initial mesh because I know that's the one part that's going to have a nice big occluding, you know, revealing nature to it. And these guys are just I'm going to use some traditional animation techniques just to reveal these guys, which means animating the radius and the height as well as their position. So they don't need to be in the volume builder. But that being said, they would be nice if they looked a little bit smoother. So I'm going to turn the fillet on and go ahead and upgrade the amount of polys on this, amount of segments, and get them nice and kind of smooth, similarly to this guy, or however you like it. And there we go. Maybe another one comes out here. Ooh, let's go ahead and I'm going to do the same thing. Maybe it's a little smaller. There we go. There we go. And we have something nice happening here. Now maybe I want that extension to come into place now. So I'm going to go ahead and just grab this original object, original cylinder, move it up here, or duplicate it. So I'm going to hit Control and just drag it, and it will duplicate that object. Now this object, I'm going to go ahead and throw. I want to do some offsetting from the deformer, the shear deformer. So I'm going to isolate this guy by putting it in its a null as well. So I'm going to hold the Alt key. As I click the null, it will put it in a null for me. Now I can take the shear deformer out, and it won't affect anything else. It'll just affect this guy inside this hierarchy. So I want to move my cylinder up now, this guy at least, and make it a little shorter. Let's move it up here. Oh, maybe, yeah, you get to see it just in the middle of this bend. It's kind of cool. But let's go ahead. Maybe now you get to see it with a little bit of the new angle that it's facing. So we have this guy. Let's go ahead and do the same thing. We're gonna have these. Let's go ahead and up the segments. Like something odd numbers are always good in my book, and it's a little too far away. Let's go ahead and just move it there. Perfect. Looks good to me. So we've taken we have no this volume builder is still not meshed with anything. It is still just voxels. So, you know, as you can see, we can lower and increase the voxel size for kind of different results, different scales. I like to think of it. It might provide you better blending to have, you know, a higher number, or better blending to have a lower number. But if you get too low, it will take a long time to calculate. Oops. Sarah stuck on that. There we go. I'm going to return it to 1. And briefly just, play with some of the adjustments that we have here. I like to go through some of these options for the blending mode and see if I can get any other results that are pleasing to the eye. Iterations usually in any of these selections will increase the render calculation time, but sometimes you can get some still good results for what depending on what your goal is. So that's, that Laplacian flow, if I'm pronouncing it incorrectly, I apologize, is pretty similar to the Gaussian with 2 and 1. It's actually fairly close. So, just to give you an idea, but it's using different, an evaluation that's doing different things. But I think this will work just fine. So I've taken you through all these guys, and we've got this base object. Let's go ahead and throw this volume builder into a volume mesher. And now it is applying the geometry. As you can see, if we go to the lines, you can see all the geometry. And now in R26, you can even remesh this geometry if you like it with the new remesher, which has a bunch of new ZBrush, intellectual property inserted now into Cinema 4D. So now you can see it's rebuilt this thing with quads, which is a nice little add, especially if you want to reduce the amount of polys at some point. It is a new, let's see if I can go ahead and reduce this down. Mesh density. And when it's kind of transparent, that means it's calculating. So now you can see the polys are now getting bigger. So if I go down to 10%, I should get some pretty decent sized quads. Not necessarily. I didn't use this for my presentation, but it may come in handy. It's a nice way. And that you can go ahead and make this editable. If you like this mesh, now you have a high quality quad art, well-made quad meshed object that you can use and you can use as a volume. You can build a volume now out of this if you want as a procedural, or we're just going to go ahead and go backwards though, and we're going to take this out of the remesh object, and leave it the traditional meshing way for now. And I believe I'm going to go ahead and jump into, now that we've got this base object, we're going to go ahead and jump. Okay, so I have gone ahead and touched up and added some layers. And now you can see the sort of object that I've color coded and just kind of created some organization here that would allow me to and built out this outer skin layer, or this outer layer, we'll call it. It's a kind of a shell layer. So if I turn off the core here, you will see that I have sort of a empty shell built around the other one. That was just as easy as kind of adding a thicker layer or a thinner layer underneath, and as you can see, just subtracting those layers from this thicker layer, and as well as these sort of protruding tree or branch stubs here that we got. So we have created a nice little geometry revealing moment fairly easily, just by kind of using one shape to delete from another shape, and then kind of deleting these two cylindrical shapes from that, and we have a nice little core or shell around our core. So it adds, and we can add as many of those as we want, or less, you know, depending on what your goal should be. And as you can see, I've kind of just color coded a couple of these things, just so we know, just so I can easily just, you know, see what I'm working with, or know which ones are paired together, you know, in a line. So, you know, because I didn't want to go ahead and name everything. I like a little more easily visual breakdown of what I'm trying to see. Now this guy, we have this sphere object, as you can see inside here. Now this sphere is what's going to reveal, as it's turned off right now. So if I show you where it is, it's just this big, big object that we're going to use to. It is stuck in place. Oh, because I have animation layers turned off at the moment, just so I already have this animated. So I'm going to turn back on all my animated layers here so that we can see. What it is I'm talking about. So this sphere starts at the bottom and just goes vertically, and we're going to use that shape to kind of reveal that core and the shell around the core. So if we turn back on our volume builder, you can start to see what is happening here. We have just that core shape now slowly revealing, and I've just animated vertically the sphere. But as you can see, it's kind of chugging along. We have a lot of geometry in play, a lot of live calculation. The volume builder is building this actively. So like I said, you can add a cache layer and cache all this into your file, which is a nice way of just temporarily, you know, helping yourself. And when you do that, when you add the cache layer, you just go ahead and add it to the top of the hierarchy of each of your volume builders. And then you need to hit the cache button. It will save, or hit animation and hit cache, and it will make sure you set your duration as well, I believe. I thought this did the entire thing. So I thought it went the entire way. So I have like 500 frames here, 513. So I would be caching 513 frames into this file. So that can get pretty heavy, like I said previously. So instead of doing that, I'm going to go ahead and bake these guys as Alembics, both of these objects. And that way, you know, it's a simple vertical, sphere that just kind of goes vertically and reveals the whole thing. There's not too much more keyframing other than that going on in this to reveal these two objects. And I can always dial that in later, but for now, I just kind of want to block in timing. So I'm going to go ahead and bake these guys. And we're done. So as you can see, now I can easily kind of scrub through and play back everything that was going on there. So these are now Alembics, as you can see. And I've turned off the original objects, and just to make sure that they're not calculating and they're also not rendering. So those guys are off. We have the inner core and the outer layer here. And you can see it's pretty easy. Now I can just kind of get back into creative animation mode and see things without having to painstakingly wait and save and wait and save. So now I've got these cameras that I've already kind of set up that have given me an idea of some compositions that would have been nice, nice new framings for, say, a title, which I could place right in the middle here, you know, and color coding my geometry gives me an idea of kind of some of the palette I might be working with. So in early stages, I like to set some of these object display colors to a custom one, just so I can kind of visually, in my mind, it helps me kind of create the composition as I'm looking to create some of these camera moves, and kind of fill out and decide how the color wants to fill out the composition as well as the shape. So I've gone and created a couple cameras. Let's go ahead and create a new one. I'm gonna drop down to here, create a new camera. Now this camera does not come in with the Redshift camera tag, so I'm going to add that in. Render. Oh wait, where is the? How do I have to create a new? Let's go to. This reminds me. Let's go to preferences. If I go to render, if I go to Redshift, I should be able to add the Redshift main menu back into Cinema, so I can access some of the old items that if you're familiar with Redshift here, you should be familiar with some of these things. So what I want to do is access a Redshift camera. Now it comes in with the correct tag, and make sure it's active. And let's find a moment that we like to frame up. And let's flip the angle. Maybe we're just looking down. Something new and wonderful. All right, so I'm kind of like, I want to follow this action. So as we're watching it, I want to kind of, well, let's see. Yeah, this will work, I believe. It's always trial and error. So I've got my camera. I'm gonna add a null because I'm gonna do some interesting things here. What I'd like to do is actually get rid of that null. Let's go to this moment here. I'm gonna use this guy as this axis that it's on, this y-axis of these objects, of these little tree limbs, is a pivot point. So I'm gonna create a null using the same coordinates by holding Control and hitting the null button. It will drop it in here, but now I'm going to take this out, and the null location is exactly where this object was. And now I can use this as a pivot point. I'm going to put my camera inside there. And now as I turn off the world coordinates, go to local, as I rotate off this pivot point and create a nice kind of unreasonably locked to angle camera that creates a kind of, that actually makes, some of my camera, orbiting techniques a little easier by finding something that seems like a natural or even an unnatural pivot point, but it is in the frame rather than some arbitrary location out of frame to pivot the camera. Or to help orbit something specifically that I want to orbit. So let's go ahead and set a keyframe. Now all the keyframes are set. We're going to go advance the timeline a little bit, and we're going to, I just want to orbit as this thing goes up and reveals. We're going to set a new keyframe. And if we open up the timeline, or Shift F3, it should pop open here at the bottom. Now if I look for this camera, or if I go into animated only, I should be able to, where is the, there we go. This is what I was looking for, this null. These keyframes are coming in as, or I only animated on this, oops, on rotation, are auto Bezier. So what I'd like to do is just convert them to linear. For now, this will suit me perfectly. I will adjust any timing in the kind of framing later, but I'm not really interested in slowly building, especially for this camera move. I just want it to be a nice steady pace. And this is the, turn those to all these keyframes in this thing to linear. So we'll move down to here so we can exaggerate and you can really see what's going on here. So now, there we go. So we see it building up and we're kind of just slowly orbiting around this position. It allows us to kind of find a locked focal point too. So now we have this kind of cool, slowly building scene that we can kind of watch as it grows up into form. And that pretty much is the gist of a lot of the scenes we built for FITC 2022 Toronto. So the title sequence was essentially a long sequence of shots built fairly similarly to what we have here. So another thing you may have noticed that I haven't yet discussed is this time track thing at the top. If you want to time remap, if you're familiar with the term in After Effects, if you're gonna kind of take the linear progressions of frames from 0 to, say, you know, if we have 513 here, they all go up by 1 frame every 1/30th of a second in this instance. Now you can see the progression of that remapping by looking at the time track curve that is displayed here, and it is displayed temporally here. So it is, the time will be registered. If you make time changes here, they will register when other objects are referencing this time track. So this would be near the original. It was 0 to 90 frames. I just took the 0 to 90 linear progression and I cut some keyframes down in the middle, and it's kind of created this extended chunk, kind of like a slow motion time, or bullet time maybe, if you want to call it that. Let's see. And then, but you can do many options. I can add a keyframe in here and I can have it go in reverse again. And then I can have it go forward towards the end and then back in reverse. I can do quite a few things here without having to go back and edit my other keyframes. I'm kind of just editing the timeline progression or objects that are paired specifically to this time track progression, which in this case is everything in the scene except for these sorts of little objects, which right now are just animated on their own. But if I wanted to do something kind of like this, now you can see, now this time track was part of the initial baking of these alembics when it was in its preview. Let me go undo a couple of these frames here. When it was in this form, actually, let's go back to there we go. It was baked along this timeline. So if I make any changes to this time track, it's not going to affect these guys anymore. If it would still affect the original volume builders and volume mesher, if I wanted to edit that time track, and then I would rebake them again as a new alembic. But now, as you can see, I got this sort of we have that time track of, you know, and currently it was part of the baking of this scene. So what I want to show you is how to apply that time track to a new object. So we got this new camera we put in there. It's not doing it. Oh wait, we're not looking at it right. So here we go. So it starts down here, rotates up and over. Now what I'd like to do is make sure this camera kind of is in time with that time track. So I select that camera null here, and you can see the field pops up over here in the attributes tab, and we can go ahead and just drag this time right into there. And now the camera animation is being driven by the time track following that time track. So now the camera starts going in slow motion as well at the correct moment in the time track. So it creates a nice bullet time effect. All right. Enough with bullet time, I've heard. That's a nice visual effects term. Let's... Now, if we scrub through, we can see that we're getting a good idea of what we're seeing. And, you know, with a couple more cameras, we can put together an entire scene here. I'm going to pop open FITC and the credit sequence, and we're going to go ahead and do a little comparison. So the next steps would be to go ahead and start to apply materials and adjust lights and, you know, detail some of the animated elements, adding more and more, giving it a little bit of direction, and tailoring each scene perhaps to the title that you have planned, or even perhaps just shots without a title at all. So we've got, you know, quite a few of those in here, but this was a title-packed sequence if I've ever done one. But we've covered a lot during just this little demonstration of kind of how to build these objects out and using the volume builder, as well as some of the more simple primitives. And the rest comes down to, you know, putting the polish. You know, the nice thing about doing a simple animation with the volume builder and baking it and just kind of, you know, working from a simple form, not too many keyframes, is that you can spend more time, hopefully, you know, adding detail to the materials that you're using, to give it an extra sense of you know, fidelity that you may not have time if you're spending more time, you know, adding, you know, custom keyframes for every little action that you want. It just kind of depends on what your goals are. So that's a wrap for me today. I hope I was able to distill what we did for FITC Toronto 2022 into something that is very useful for people of all skill sets alike. There were obviously a lot more scenes and a lot more usages of Red Giant tools or Maxon tools throughout this project, but we pretty much distilled down everything into a volume builder, creating some sort of sculpture of sorts. So with that being said, I'd like to wrap it up and thank Maxon for having me, and wish you guys all a great day.